Okay, so I came across a website, Upify, I think it's called. I believe it's called, which sort of promotes videos that are intended to be uplifting or original, interesting, that sort of thing. It's quite an interesting website. Just came across it today. Anyway, they featured a video by the actor Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and the title of the video was "See This Male Feminist Reaction as He Comes Across the Group Women Against Feminism." Not an exact quotation, but something along those lines. Anyway, Joseph Gordon-Levitt is quite a prominent male feminist, but in the video he was speaking about um, how he appeared on the Ellen DeGeneres show and how she asked did he describe himself as a feminist. He said he did. He said that from his perspective it was the idea that people should not be defined by the gender. He also said that he found it interesting that there was such a contentious issue, and he said he didn't realise that. With all due respect to Mr Levitt, I think that comes across as slightly naive, if he didn't realise that it was a contentious issue, if he didn't realise there was a lot of controversy around it. But I have to say he came across as very respectful and open-minded in the video, although he said nothing to convince me otherwise about feminism. He went on to go on about sort of the pay gap for women and so on, and said nothing about men's issues. Although to be fair to him, he did give an open invitation for people to define feminism as they see it. And he also made reference to the group Women Against Feminism. So I'm doing that now. I'm making a response to his request, and also sort of making this essentially part 3 of the 2 previous videos I was making. Obviously, something like this is very difficult to cover within a 15-minute video. There's just so many ins and outs to take. That's why I always end up making another video. But I'll try and get to the point here. So, when I think about feminism, I think about modern Western feminism. To me, it is a divisive, hypocritical, fundamentally misandric, and dishonest movement. I really do believe it is all of these things. That doesn't mean individual feminists are. He seems like a reasonable man. Emma Watson I don't think is an extremist. So it's not a case that I believe all feminists are like that. But as a movement, I believe this is a movement that has got a negative reputation for a very good reason, because it's brought it on itself, and it's now desperately trying to get support, because most men and most average women don't support feminism. And yet if you look at this movement, it actually gets far too much of a disproportionate influence in political bodies, in national Western governments. In Britain we have a women's minister, which I think is a bit of a joke, because it's actually rather patronising to women. Like the idea that half the population need a specific ministerial department. We have women's studies in school, in the school curriculum. Sorry, I should say university curriculums. Again, I think that's ridiculous. He for she I already discussed a bit, but basically, this is the thing, right? If feminism is really about equality, which feminists repeat over and over and over again, why do the following things not happen? Why do feminists not actively campaign for men's rights and not just talk about those things? I'm talking about moderate feminists will say, oh, we do care about those things, but I'm yet to see a feminist actually act on it. Secondly, if they believe in equality, why do they stand in the way of men's issues? Because I guarantee you, when men do try to bring about issues to do with men's rights, more often than not, they're shouted down by feminists. A guy replied on my last video, one of my subscribers, Tim Perry, and he pointed out a video by Stefan Molyneux. Now, Stefan Molyneux made a good point, which was something I hadn't noticed until he mentioned it, and that was at the start of Emma Watson's speech. She said, feminism has a reputation as being about man-hating, and this has to stop. She got big applause for that. But what exactly was she referring to? Was she referring to that bad reputation has to stop? Or was she referring to the fact that the misandry within the movement has to stop? Now, if she was referring to the latter, then I give her complete credit, and it's great that she's saying that, because there is blatant misandry within the movement. But if she was saying that its negative reputation has to stop, that is something I take issue with, because this is just like saying feminism's above criticism. And the ironic thing about Joseph Gordon-Levitt's video was he basically said he was inviting people to have open discussion on this, and for that I give him credit. That's an open-minded approach. But this is precisely the problem. For so long, feminism hasn't tolerated dissent. It hasn't tolerated different views. Just look at any Facebook feminist group, try to share a different opinion, you'll automatically be called a troll, even if you're just trying to make a point and you're not there to wind people up or anything like that, because that's my understanding of what an internet troll is. If you try to voice a different opinion or challenge them in any way, shape or form, they'll shout you down. And this is true of anyone in public life as well. Women politicians, the reason I think so many call themselves feminists is because if a woman politician was to say, I'm not a feminist, feminists would give her hell and probably ensure that she didn't get elected again. Male politicians, again, it's almost impossible to say anything against this movement. They have undue influence in media because they get far more airtime, in my opinion, than they're representative of. Because, like I say, the majority of people do not describe themselves as feminists. So why is it the feminists get such a large amount of airtime? I think that is really a contentious issue. Fundamentally, feminism is not a movement that is open to critique. It is not a movement that welcomes various ideas. Now, people will say there's different feminist movements. That's true. But as a movement as a whole, for non-feminists, it is absolutely intolerant. If you're a man and you don't slavishly agree with everything they say, then as far as they're concerned, you're a disgusting misogynist pig. You could say you support women's rights. You can even prove that, but it won't make any difference to them, because they force conformity, and that's one other reason I can't stand it. It's forced conformity. They say they're all about giving choice to women, but there's few people I can think of that are actually less respectful of women's choices than feminists. Because, I know this is another example of it. I mean, Mr Levitt said that he always thought feminism was about not making people have strictly defined gender roles. And I'm okay with that. I don't mind. You know, I'm open-minded. I think people should be comfortable in themselves. The problem is feminism has taken the other extreme of vilifying traditional gender roles. So, for example, a traditional man, feminists will portray as controlling. A traditional woman, feminists will portray as submissive. So they don't respect people's lifestyles at all. They want to force conformity onto everyone else. They want to shout down everyone else. I'm talking about the movement. I'm not talking about individual feminists. So I see absolutely nothing about the movement that is appealing whatsoever. I am someone who believes in unifying people, not dividing people. I'm someone who believes in progressive movements, not movements that constantly slander half the human race. Feminists will deny that, but just look at the history of the movement. I mean, look at how feminists nitpick at the tiniest things. I'm talking about Western feminists. If they were actually campaigning on serious human rights abuses against women, if they were making that a priority, then we say, okay, those are important issues. But what gets me is when they blame men for the decisions that adult women take, when they ignore the many, many issues impacting men. And the more I've scrutinised it, for the record, the more I think he for she is completely flawed. All that really done was a PR stunt by the feminist movement to try and make itself look good. It's a little bit like far-right groups wearing shirts and ties and being polite and trying to look more respectable. Likewise, the feminist movement has put this young woman, Emma Watson, as their spokeswoman. As far as I'm concerned, that's not going to change decades of polarising people. It's not going to change decades of scapegoating and slandering men and forcing women to conform. So really, I still see feminism as a deeply divisive and problematic movement. I don't think this is an international thing. When I'm talking about feminism, I am talking specifically about the Western context. And I do repeat, I believe there's parts of the world where there are specific women's movements needed, as there are in some areas specific men's movements needed. But in the Western context, when women have full legal rights, then I just regard it as hate movement might be a strong term, because individual feminists don't necessarily hate men, but there's unquestionably misandry within the movement, and it is unquestionably divisive. I just think, if feminism is really about equality, they would also call for equal responsibility. So why is it they can't accept that if a woman commits a crime, she goes to jail? No, feminists will demand committees on women in prison and this sort of thing. The point here is they demand equality. No, actually, they demand equal results as opposed to equal opportunity, which is far more important in principle. And yet they don't talk about equal responsibility. And I think one of the things I resent most of all is, if you don't call yourself a feminist, if you're a man, then they'll call you a misogynist, and if you're a woman, they'll call you submissive. So it's actually a deeply, deeply exclusive movement in that sense. Nothing about Emma Watson's speech changes my mind about feminism. And with all due respect to Mr Levitt, I appreciate him being open-minded and asking people to share how they see the definition, but it came across as slightly naive if he didn't realise that the word has such contention. I mean, I respect his opinion. He's every right to call himself a feminist and to believe in it and all the rest of it. That's entirely his right. But I hope he understands that the very reason so many men are put off feminism, and many women for that matter, is precisely because it is such a deeply intolerant movement. And one of the biggest problems is moderate feminists will always say that they're not man-haters and that they support men's rights as well, but they do nothing to challenge the misandrists within their movement. Now, as Stephen Molyneux pointed out, it's unfair to define an entire movement by its extremists. However, it is fair to define a movement if the moderates within the movement do not do anything to challenge and to contain the extremists. And that's just the problem with feminism. They do nothing to contain the extremists, of which there are many.